Hi. My name is Kwaku Boakye Frempong, as he has stated, and then today I am happy to actually present to you my compositional process, what I go through before writing music. And just as you rightly said, I'm a composer of both vocal and instrumental music. Of course, with my focus on contemporary classical music. Notwithstanding, I also have compositions that are in Baroque music, classical, in fact, all the eras. Yeah. But today I'm going to talk about something particular. I think I'll start sharing my screen. Um, yeah, please a moment. Yeah. Okay, please, I hope you can all see the screen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. So my presentation is concerned with the Afrocentric Classical Music Framework, the essence of Africa in African arts music. And in fact, there are various compositional processes that a lot of composers go through. In fact, there's no right one and there's no wrong one. Everyone has their process. But for the purposes of this presentation, these are some of the stuff I'm going to be going through. Of course, I'm going to be doing an introduction. There'll be some definition of terms, and we are going to look at the elements of Afrocentric classical music, which contains minimalism, modal jazz, and then African rhythmic techniques. And also, the composition that I'm using as a case study is entitled Mobius Fantasia, or Mobius Fantasia, as others will call it. And I'm going to be making an analysis on that. And for the last one, I'm going to look at the flowchart of Afrocentric classical music. Yes. Yeah, so to begin with, realize that there are several composers of African descent that have actually contributed to developing African art music. We have several composers, and even till date, we have several composers that are actually contributing to the development of African art music. And one of the techniques or the compositional techniques that have been popular is African pianism, which a lot of composers still use till this day. In fact, when it started, it was basically for piano music, but now I realize that African pianism is actually introduced into several type, whether vocal music, whether in fact, for other instruments as well. And for those who are not familiar with African pianism, actually, it happens to be a compositional process or a compositional technique that captures rhythms that are indigenous to Africa. And usually these are actually used on, as I said in the beginning, historically it was basically meant for the piano until later composers decided to use it as a process for composing for other instruments. And we have the one who championed or started championing African pianism in the person of Akin Yuba. I hope I pronounced the name right. The Nigerians should spare me if I didn't pronounce it right. Yeah. He is widely known as the inventor of the style or of the process. And we have composers like Ayo Bankole, we have Uzo Egwe, we have Nketia, and these are composers that actually championed African pianism. If you see over here, we have some pieces by some African composers, like the Wakaduru by Akin Yuba himself, who happens to be the father of African pianism. We have the Volta Fantasy by Johann or JHK Nketia. And then we have the Nigerian Suite by Ayoba Nkole. We have Kale by Ken Kafui. We have Hope for the Shackled by George Mensah Isilfi. And then we have the 24 Studies in African Rhythms by Fred Onoverosoke. Yes. And these are some examples of pieces that extensively use African pianism. Actually, the Akinyuba encourages African composers to employ African traditional instruments in order to get an African sound in their compositions. And in fact, he makes use of the drum too as well. That for any piece that you compose, at least there should be a drum. So if it's a piece you are composing for maybe the piano, at least there should be some kind of percussive instrument. It could be the cowbell, it could be the drum, it could be the rattle, so that it will have that African identity. And just as his piece Igi Nlaso or Igi Inlaso. I'm not too sure about the pronunciation, but I know it's a piece for the piano and then drums. And but the question that one will pose is, should an African instrument really be included before you can get that African identity? Can't we actually compose for only Western instruments but still achieve that African identity in the music? Usually, the goal is not to stifle composers. I want to compose a piece, but the only instruments that are available to me are string instruments, the violin, the viola, the cello. But do I still need to add drums before I'll sound African? And also, can't our traditional instruments actually be replaced by instruments of Western descent? So I have an example here, the atentebeng, which is usually the bamboo flute from West Africa. Um, One can argue that, okay, I can replace that atentebeng with the concert flute that we have, because generally it's difficult getting an atentebeng that is well tempered, because if you want to perform certain music, you need an instrument that is well tempered, else it won't sound well when it comes to pitching. Although, yes, we do have instruments like that sound or that have a very good sound, they are well tempered and all that, but there are few. And also, we have the gonje. That happens to be the traditional sort of violin that is usually played by northern cultures all around West Africa. Can't a violin also play intricately as that? That's the question that we ask ourselves. But in all, I'm not saying that we should do away with African instruments, and that will actually be bad on my part as an African composer. In fact, we are including it, but the goal is that I'm actually looking for um, a framework, a compositional framework, a compositional technique that can help all composers, not just African composers, so that probably you have someone from maybe, let's say, from USA. He's a composer. He has been contracted to write for a certain movie, and there should be an African theme. I believe that he can look at this and compose for that. Maybe he doesn't have access to African traditional instruments. All he has is the Western instrument. So that's the goal. That's the reason why. And we have a composer like Fela Showande. Fela Showande actually composed the African suite. And most of us have listened to it before. It sounds very African, but you don't have drums in there. You don't have rattles. You get the point I'm trying to make. Yes. So it's just that I'm looking for an efficient technique that will, number one, not stifle composers, but at the same time, it's still pushing that African identity. Yes. So that's the goal that saw this proposal of the Afrocentric Classical Music Framework. Okay. So what necessitated the framework? We are looking at number one, enhancing the arrangement of African folk songs. If you look at art music, especially from a Western point of view, what made it popular or what actually increased the patronage for it is they took folk songs or songs that they know traditionally, and then they developed it, they built on it. For instance, if you pick Mozart's 12 variations on the Twinkle Twinkle Little Stars, that melody is actually a melody that existed long before even his birth, and he picked it up. People identified with it, and then they patronized it. And then number two, we have the instrument and sound balance in the orchestration of African music. Um, I used to work with the National Symphony Orchestra, and there was a problem with some compositions where um, rather, because they are trying to achieve that African identity in the music, there's usually not that balance in the composition. So you realize that, for instance, they compose it like they're composing for an African choir, SATB. So rather than actually looking at the instruments, their capabilities, and then assigning melodies or assigning accompaniments for each of the instruments, they bring all together, and then it's not it doesn't bring that beauty of Africanness in the music. So that's what we are looking at, the instruments and then sound balance. And then also we are talking about maintaining the African character in the composition of instrumental music, especially. And then for lastly, looking at minimizing the possibility of composer's block. If there's any composer amongst us, they will agree with me that there's a point in time you are trying to compose and you are stuck for like about 2 months, 3 months, you'll not be able to come back to the composition. And it's like you can't move forward. So this framework actually takes care of that because there are certain techniques in there that will help you to or let me say that helps me to actually get rid of composer's block. Yeah. All right, so let's talk about composers that have actually inspired me. Number one is Bela Bartok. He's a Hungarian composer. We have Igor Stravinsky, who happens to be a Russian composer. Then Florence Price, who is an American composer. Steve Reich, also an American composer. Then we have Victor Manison, a Ghanaian composer, and then Gabriel Abedi, who was also a Ghanaian composer. Someone may ask a question that why did I list the Caucasians first before, but I didn't have it. The order in which I arrange the composers is in order of chronology. So from the oldest to the youngest or living. Yeah, that's the main reason why it's ordered that way. Yeah. Okay, so the definition of term, someone would ask, what is Afrocentric? And Afrocentric simply means to be influenced by African cultures or to be of African origin. So anything of African origin or anything that's centered on African tradition or culture is Afrocentric. And of course, we all know what classical music is all about, just a broad tradition of European art music. But basically, we've come to understand that it goes beyond music being European. Okay, we actually talk about the fact that it has a complex structure. It is formal. Its listeners usually listen to it in a formal environment and all that. It's not like the popular music, which everyone will patronize. And it's not a bad thing. I mean, in every aspect of life, there's classism. For those who are Christians here, even in heaven, there's some sort of classism because the principality and then the cherubim are not on the same level. You understand? So in every aspect, there's supposed to be classism. Yeah. Okay, so what are the elements of Afrocentric classical music framework? These are the three major elements. We have number one, minimalism, and then number two, modal jazz, and number three, African rhythmic techniques. And I'm going to actually expand them so that we get or we understand what it's all about. So minimalism, the first one. In fact, there are so many people who have tried to define minimalism. Even the composers of minimalist music don't even want to identify themselves as minimalists. So a definition was actually brought up by these three writers. We have Porter, Apsion, and then Gunn. And in 2013, this is how they define minimalism. That it covers its characteristics so that it refers to repetitive music in which melodic or rhythmic figures are repeated. So usually music that has several or a lot of repeated melodies, repeated elements, repeated, divisions and all that. And then also while there's a gradual, usually there are gradual changes in some of the techniques and then all that. So basically to give a broad understanding, it's just making repetition beautiful. Because usually we know that generally in life, when something is repeated over and over, it becomes boring, it becomes too systematic. But minimalism takes care of that, trying to make repetition sound pleasant to the human ear. And that's what minimalism does. There are several techniques that come under minimalism, and number one is the drones. So drones usually refer to long-held notes or repetition of the same notes. So usually, if you have, let's say, a note like la for a very long time, that's a drone. Or you can have la 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 for a very long time. That's a drone. Or those are drones, let me put it that way. So several repetition of notes. And we have ostinatos. And ostinatos, or ostinatos are simply short repeated melodic phrases. It can also be short repeated rhythmic phrases. And then they happen throughout a section of a piece or the whole piece anyway. Yes. And then we have layering. And layering involves introduction of similar or contrasting repetitive ideas. And usually this creates some sort of contrapuntal functions just to give some, texture, deep texture to the composition. And then we have phasing. And phasing usually involves different voice starting at various points in time. And then, or at times they start together, the voices start together, playing the same melody. At a point in time, they begin to move out of sync. So if I'm to demonstrate with my hands, you have two melodies like this together. And as they are moving together, they begin to go out of sync like this. And then at a point in time, they come back together. So that's what we call phasing. And then we have the harmonic stasis. And harmonic stasis is just a deliberate suspension of harmonic movements just to create some sort of timelessness and then lack of forward movement. Yeah. And then also there's note addition. And note addition, of course, just as the name goes, is the addition of notes to a stated motif just to bring variation. So if you pick Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, ta 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 tam, sorry, ta 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 tam, and then ta 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 tam. At a point in time, he begins to add notes. That's some sort of note addition. And then we have note subtraction, which is the opposite of note addition. It's just a removal of notes from a stated motif or a motif that has been modified. Yes. So these are, I hope everyone can see. So these are examples. So for the drones, the ones with the short repeated notes, so you realize that there are several notes in the first picture. It's the same note repeated several times in quavers. Yes. So usually this can go on for a very, very, very long time. And for the second one, these are long sustained notes. Yes. And so the first one happens to be from Steve Reich's Electric Counterpoint. And then the last one is from one of my compositions entitled The River Spirit. And then we have ostinatos. If you pick Gabriel Abede's composition, Ewe Land Rhapsody, you realize that there are several repeated rhythms in there if you observe them. Yes. And then if you pick ostinatos too from a composition I call Rhythm of Air, it's actually for 5 flutes. I also have ostinatos in there. Yeah, and the next one, you have layering from Philip Glass's music in 12 parts. Yes, so you realize that different rhythms are, or different melodies are stacked upon each other and then moving simultaneously. So it's just like counterpoints, yes. And we have layering too in my composition called the Savannah Fantasia over there. Yeah. And then we have phasing, just as I explained. You realize that the two melodies will begin at a point in time and then move out of phase. A similar thing happens in Steve Reich's Electric Counterpoint, and then also my composition, Mobius Fantasia. Yes. So if you observe carefully, from the beginning of my Mobius Fantasia, you realize that in the first bar, the flute, violin 1 and violin 2, they begin to play the melody. Then when it goes to the next bar, the flute actually is out of sync. And the same thing is repeated throughout all the instruments until they are all out of sync. At a point in time, it comes back together just to create that phasing effect. Then we have harmonic stasis. So we have this Icelandic composer Björk Gudmundsdóttir from from her composition Comet. And Comet, if you realize, is actually using the same harmony. It's the same thing throughout. So if you observe the notes over there, you realize that um, everything is actually in one harmony. Actually, I wanted to add the audio so that we hear how it sounds like, but copyright reasons, I didn't want I didn't get time to actually seek her permission. Yeah. But if you pick my composition, in my composition, Dagomba Fantasy, you see something similar. If you look at the marimba, it's playing the same harmony throughout or the same chord throughout, while the other parts build on it. Then we have note addition from Philip Glass. And then also note addition from my composition, Agbaja. Agbaja Bliss. Sorry, that's the full name of the composition, Agbaja Bliss. Yeah. And then we have the note subtraction from Steve Reich's piano face. Yes. So if you look at the beginning of the piece, you realize that it's full, but it continues going. A lot of notes are being taken out bit by bit until the end when there's no notes remaining at all. All right, so that's about minimalism. So basically, before I move to modal jazz, basically, if you pick African music in general, our music is minimalistic because if you pick, let's say, a percussive section, for instance, if there's a dance that's going on, we have our ensemble over there. When the one keeping the timeline, maybe the cowbell starts playing, the same thing over. It's repeated over and over. Others begin to join it. You can call that layering. And even the rhythms that they are playing, you can say they are ostinatos because it's the same thing repeating over and over and over and over and over again. Yes. And then even if there are singers as part of it, when you listen to it carefully, you realize that is the same chordal movement or the same harmony. It does not really change. So that can be termed as the harmonic stasis because it continues to stay that way till the end of the music. But we'll come to that since I'll be giving an analysis on my composition. We'll come to that. So now let's go to modal jazz. And then modal jazz is music that is usually based on the repetition of chords gradually and usually makes uses of the church modes. I know we all know about church modes, and well, for those who do not know, I think there's enough literature on that, so you get to understand it. Where we have Ionian mode, Dorian mode, and all that. So that rather than thinking of music in chords, you rather think of them in modes. And there have been several articles to support the fact that usually African music is in modes. If I'm to sing in solfege, let's say if you pick an African song, they can actually, or let's say a folk song, instead of Western music where the music that starts from do and ends on do or starts from la and ends on la. In African music, the music can start from fa and actually end on re, and it works. So that's how modality basically works. Modal jazz was actually developed and popularized in 1950s, and then the father of modal jazz is known to be George Russell. And then we have Miles Davis, So What, which happens to be one of the popular songs or the popular, should I say, compositions in the style of modal jazz. And we are told that in modal jazz compositions, the number of harmonic changes are few. And this usually allows the musicians to, improvise. So if you listen to So What, Miles Davis So What, you realize that the chords is just two chords that are moving over and over and over, and it creates a lot of improvisation. The original song is I think it's over 10 minutes long. Yeah. And then for composers, for the instrumentalists to allow them to improvise, but for composers, it will allow us to actually explore more ideas for a very extended period. So you can end up having maybe just 2 chords or just 3 chords. And because of how modal jazz is moving and the knowledge of how to use modes to compose, you end up extending your composition. An example of someone I can say his music actually inspired modal jazz is the composer Maurice Ravel. Ravel in his composition Bolero, he uses just 1 chord. He uses just 1 chord. And he built melody on it from little until it becomes so much in the beginning. At a point in time, he switches the mode from the Ionian into an Aeolian, or from the major to the minor, and it still works. It's the same chord kept as it is, and the melody is just built on it to the end. And you don't realize it. It's only people who are into music analysis or maybe composition, people who are into music, who will be able to realize that no, this composer has actually, written, or maybe he has written a lot based on something small. But for the ordinary listener, they might not even observe. They would have listened to a 15-minute piece without even knowing that it's just something small that has been built on. Yes, and then in modal jazz, when you are voicing a chord, usually you can omit certain tones or certain notes. Just as, for instance, if you have a triad, let's say a major triad, you can actually omit the third just to create some sort of shift between modes or between keys. It just helps for modulation in general, so that you are not restricted. So basically, that's how modal jazz works. And then also we have the African rhythmic techniques. And with the African rhythmic techniques, realize that in Africa, in fact, there are several cultures, there are several languages, and in fact, within each tribe that exists, it's believed that there are even factions in between. Everybody still has the way they do their things, and everyone has the way they do their stuff. And because of that, I would say African music is actually rich when it comes to borrowing rhythms, when it comes to borrowing folk elements or anything of that sort. When it comes to borrowing them for a composition, in fact, you are not going to be in luck. And one may actually fuse different rhythmic timelines from separate cultures. I have a piece of music whereby I picked 2 tribes and then I picked their rhythmic lines and then I mixed them together. Yes. So when it comes to instrumentation, especially for orchestra, one may actually use strings to play the rhythmic ostinatos. Because if you are going to play ostinatos for a very long time, I think string instruments are the ones that do not need to use air to play their instruments. So basically, they are the ones who are going to have the responsibility of playing rhythmic ostinatos. Although it can change, you can give that to, wind instruments as well, but we're also looking at such that the momentum doesn't die down. And then also you can pick certain harmonic rules and give it to the brass instruments or some accompaniment rules. And then usually the woodwinds, they will be responsible for coloring and then flowering. So this is how actually I personally arrange when I'm actually writing for orchestra. Yes. So I would like to just play my composition Mobius Fantasia, and then we'll actually talk about they will do the analysis on it. Yeah. So I crave your indulgence. Thank you. Okay, so that was Mobius Fantasia. Yeah, that was Mobius Fantasia. Yeah. And oh yeah, I see a clap there. Thank you. Yeah. So I composed this piece in 2023, 2 years ago. Actually, the story behind it is a funny one. I was supposed to have a rehearsal with the Accra Chamber Orchestra, and it turned out that a lot of them were going to be involved in other stuff, and so for that rehearsal, we couldn't cancel because it was too late. So I had like an hour just to put something together, and this is what I put together for those who are going to attend. So that's why you don't have the full instrumentation of an orchestra. All you have is the flute, the bassoon, and then the string section. So that's what brought about this composition. And I actually dedicated it to one of the patrons of Accra Chamber Orchestra. He's in the person of Julius Richardson. He happens to be a concert pianist, and he's a very good piano teacher, a piano pedagogist. And then and he was actually pleased when I did. Yeah. And it's the good thing about it is that it came out, or the composition I wrote it around the time when I was trying to work on the framework, and it happens to be one of the early pieces. There are several pieces I've now written that actually use the framework. And yeah, I spoke about the instrumentation. So we have for the flute, the bassoon, the first and second violin, viola, cello, and then the double bass. And the key signature is C, of course, and then the time signature is 12/8. Yes. And so for just as I mentioned earlier, we have different minimalist techniques. I talked of drones, I talked of phasing, I talked of harmonic stasis, I talked of ostinatos, layering, note addition, and note subtraction. But this piece, I didn't do note addition, I didn't do note subtraction. So I'm left with drones, ostinatos, layering, phasing, and then harmonic stasis. Yeah. I was actually supposed to share the score to the group. Unfortunately, I don't know, for some reason, my Google Drive was not permitting me. Um, but at the moment, I don't know if Daniel would just spare me about 2 minutes for me to get the score. I don't know if it's possible to drop the score in the chat.
Yeah, I think if you want to spend 2 minutes,
Okay. All right.
I,
Okay.
I, I
Thank
think
you.
I think while you do that, I can talk about the feedback form. Not that anyone wants to hear about the feedback form.
Okay. Okay. All right. Okay.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I know you've been dying to hear from me. So just a note, after this session, we do have a feedback form. Your feedback form is very crucial because it helps us kind of improve our programs. The other thing that I will say is after the session, we're going to send you all an email. I don't know if you know, but right now we have a call for submission for publishing works. And I just want to emphasize, I'll put it here in the chat. It closes in November 2nd. But if you've been going to the sessions and you enjoy what's been going on and you think you have a work you would like to publish with a very small, local arts organization that's international, I implore you to consider publishing with us. We have some current selections, but again, this closes November 23rd. We're looking for original unpublished compositions, educational pieces that represent the African identity. If anyone has any questions, please go to this link in the chat, and you can also reach out to me via email here. But I look forward to receiving some of your submissions. We have an editorial board that will be reviewing after the deadline, and we'll announce who our editorial board is for this year. So just because you submit doesn't necessarily mean it will be accepted. The editorial board is kind of the additional eye that decides which ones we put on our website for this cycle. Oh, great. The piece is here. Great. It's in the chat, everyone. But please, feedback form and the composition call a call for composers. I'll pass it back to you.
All right, thank you. So I think I'll go back to sharing my screen. Moment. Okay. I'm sorry. Sorry, a moment. Okay. Okay, yeah. So sorry about that. So now let me share. Okay. All right. So the first thing I'm going to talk about the drones, and then if you look at bars 47 to 64, you see me using long drones, and then even from bar 5, you realize that the cello and double basses play a very, very, very long note. And then and usually these drones actually use them to create some type of hypnotic effect. And you see, when you usually hear something that's repeated at the beginning, it draws your attention. But as time goes on, your mind actually leaves, and then you rather concentrate on the main thing, which is the main melody that comes in later. And then, so for the ostinatos, if you look at from bars 1 to 8, you realize that violins and violin 2 and the viola play ostinatos. And these are actually, these ostinatos they are playing are actually from the dance called Adwa. And so you have ka 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 ka, and the violin 2 has something that is off. It's like the inverse or a varied form of and these rhythms are actually played by the cowbells of the troupe, or should I say the ensemble that plays the Adowa music. And we also have the viola also playing some ostinatos in there as well. Yes. And then if you look at bars 49 to 40 to 42, there are also ostinatos in there, which are basically rhythmic ostinatos. Yes. And the ostinatos are basically supposed to enhance the accompaniment. Because basically, if you pick African dance music, you realize that it's the accompaniment, the ostinatos of the drums or the percussive accompaniment. That's what we basically see happening there. But in this case, you realize that the string section is actually playing that role. Yes. And then we have layering, and where I talked about two melodies that are over the other. But of course, making sense, they make much more sense when it comes to the harmony. So if that you can see that in bars 22 to bar 23. And they are playing some sort of contrapuntal function that's between the flute and then the first violin. And then by the same instrument, if you go to bar 69 to 72, you also see some sort of layering. And by the way, this score will be available for every one of us who has attended the session. So it's not for sale. This music is not for sale. So everyone would have access to it as study material. If anybody's interested in getting it performed too, I'll just send the instrumental parts as well. Yes. And they also have the harmonic stasis. And you realize that the harmony in bars 5 to 21, you realize it remains static, it remains the same, with just some slight changes. between the two chords. If you are supposed to analyze the chords, you realize that it's from 6/7, chord 6/7, and then it moves to 4/7, just like that. And usually, even if there's going to be a change in the chords, both chords must have some kind of characteristics. They should share some characteristics so that the change in chord won't be that abrupt. It won't also be too obvious. And then when you talk of facing, when you go to, I think bars, I think that should be later. I think bar 70, in the bar 70, almost at bar 80. Yeah, you realize that the flute, the first and the second violin, they start a certain melody. Ta ta ti ta 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 ti da da dam, ta da di da 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 di da da dam, and they begin to fall out of sync. Actually, it's the flute that begins to move out of sync first. By the time we realize they are all away. Now that is just there to create some sort of echo effect. As time goes on, you realize that they begin to move back, just like I demonstrated with my hands. So they begin to move back again just to restore the melody, or just to restore the synchronicity. Yeah. Now, let's analyze it according to the modal jazz technique. So realize that in this piece, if while listening, you realize that the harmonic changes were not a lot, were not so much, with exception of some parts where I was actually just dropping. So we have da da dum dum da dum 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 dum. Yeah, that's just something I just put in there to add some sort of variety to the piece. Yeah, so if you look at bars 41 to bars 40, so bars 1 to bars 4, sorry. And before that, if you also remember, I was saying that usually for modal jazz, we think of harmony in terms of moods rather than chords. Not that chords are not used at all, but they are. But just that when you're using moods, usually some of the strict rules according to harmony don't really, I mean, they apply in the sense that they have to make sense, but they also don't restrict you at the same time. So in bars 1 to 4, you realize that the mode of the piece is in Ionian mode, and then its underlying chord is chord. It's a ninth chord. It's a ninth chord. And in bar 5, you realize that the drone notes over there causes the harmony to switch to the Ionian mode. So basically from a major to a minor. Yes. And then when you go to bar 9, the harmony changes to Dorian mode. And then over the underlying chord, it can be said it's just a second inversion of chord 211, or 11th chord. And in bar 10, the harmony goes back to the Ionian mode. And then also, just as I was saying, we know it's modal jazz, and some of the chords, the extended chords that is the 11th, 13th, and then 9th chords. I didn't use them necessarily because it's modal jazz, no, because basically modal jazz you can actually use, let's say, a triad, a major triad, and then you can still build your music on top of it, because we have this thought that jazz is defined by the chords, the type of chords that you play, but it's not to a general extent. I mean, yes, it plays a role, but jazz is all about improvisation. That's what. So with modal jazz, you can actually pick just a major triad, chord 1, and then you build your whole music on top of it. It is the style, the fact that you're improvising, the fact that you're keeping the chord without changing it. That's what makes it modal jazz. So that's why I end up saying that one should note that the use of extended chords is as a result of the piece drawing inspiration from some jazz elements. Yes. I mentioned that some of the composers that inspire me is Victor Manison. Victor Manison is actually a Ghanaian composer who also his music is usually jazz based. It contains a lot of improvisation. It contains a lot of unconventional methods, and that is where I draw my inspiration from. So that's how come we have some of this so-called jazz chords in the music. Yeah. And then also, I don't know, for those who also checked, you realize that there are some of the chords there, like I was saying, in modal jazz, at times to create that element of surprise or to create a situation where people can't really, you want your audience to be fixed on the music. You don't want them to be able to anticipate where you're going to move to. So usually deliberately omit some degrees or some notes from your chord just as to create, some suspense. So if you look at bar 5 like this, we have chord 611. That's our 11th chord. And if you check the chord very well, you realize I omitted the ninth. I omitted the ninth. In bar 47, there's a ninth chord. I omitted the seventh degree just as to create some sort of ease into the modulation. So the listener will be listening by the time he realizes there's a change of key. Yeah. And then also, if you look at bar 58, the flute plays a melody that automatically causes the music to modulate to G. And in that G, it's Lydian mode. So basically, that's what this does. You are just omitting certain notes so that the modulation will be easier. Yes. Now let's look at the analysis in terms of the African rhythmic techniques. And if you look at the rhythms that I used in Mobius Fantasia, like I said, it's borrowed from a dance called Adoa. And Adoa is a dance that's usually done by the Ashantis from the Ashanti region of Ghana. I'm actually an Ashanti. So let me say this piece also honors my culture or where I come from. Yes, and it's a dance that's usually performed at, high profile functions, debes, and then, places where, honored guests are supposed to be. So we have a culture whereby, for instance, when uh, there's an honored guest coming or a very important personality coming in, you get two dancers, and then you have the drummers playing the Adoa rhythm, and the dancers will be, dancing in front of them just to welcome them to an event. Yes. And the instruments that are usually used in the ensemble, we have the tumpan. The tumpan is what we call the master drum. It looks like the kettle drum, but it's traditional. So you have V-shaped sticks and they used to play it. So usually the master drum actually calls the other instruments in. We have the dero. The dero is a two-headed cowbell. And we have the introa. The introa is a rattle or let's say maracas. But of course, the traditional one, the one with the gourd and then the beads around it. And then we have the dono. The dono is I have seen that in some cultures, in Malian cultures, Senegalese, and I think even Nigerian cultures. So it's like an hourglass with strings attached, and it's placed under the armpit. So as they are playing, yeah. So that's what we call the dondo in Ashanti or in my language, Ashanti tree. Yes, and then we have the petia. The petia is also a very small, short drum, and we have the apentema. Is also that's quite bigger than the petia. So all these instruments come together to make up the Adowa ensemble, and then yeah. So basically, that's about the instruments used in the Adowa dance. So of course, like I was saying, so I picked the ostinatos that I actually put in a composition. I picked the timelines that are played by these instruments. For example, if you pick the two cowbells or the two of them, the first violin, the second violin, if you look at the beginning of the music, like I demonstrate ka 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 ka. So it's actually picking that timeline and then yes, demonstrated it. And from the beginning parts of my slides, I also mentioned that usually I would give those ostinatos to the string instruments so that they can be able to play for a longer time because they are not using air. The music won't die down. The momentum that they started with won't die down if it had been if it's given to a wind instrument, it gets to a time they'll be tired and all that. Yes. And then Also, if you pick what the viola is playing, the bars 1 to bar 4, actually they are playing the varied rhythms of the petia. Yes. And if you pick from bars 10 to 23, you have the first and second violins. They switch playing that. And then now they start playing other, rhythms of Pythia. So you see, you realize that all the ostinatos, or let me say the drum lines or the rhythmic lines that I've gotten, I am just playing around with them. If I had to extend this music for maybe about 20 minutes, I would have gotten several elements to work with or several stuff to work with because they are at my disposal. Because these rhythmic lines that are being played by Dadwa, there's more. They have varied rhythms and all that are played. And I didn't even add what the master drum is supposed to play because usually the master drummer, like I said, he brings the other instruments in. He can play a certain rhythm and then signal another instrument to follow him and all that. So there's a lot to actually grasp from. And if you check bar 37, over there, all the instruments except the flutes actually borrow a rhythm from the appentima. And then
It's 7 o'clock.
That section of it is called the ahrum. The ahrum, yes. The ahrum of Adowa is more like the joyful aspect. Like at that point, everybody can now make merry, like be in wanton mode. That's the aspect of it. There's more literature on Adowa, so anybody who is curious about it can actually get more about the dance. Yes, and yeah, also I made a flow chart. And of course, I'll share this presentation too so that anybody that's willing to know more about it can actually get. I'm hoping everyone can see what's there. Yeah, I hope so. Okay, so just as a flow chart works, from the beginning we see starts. Well, that's when we want to compose. Now, there's one aspect of composition. Of course, you have to choose a form. You have to choose a form before you start composing. Otherwise, unless maybe you are doing a through compose form, whereby wherever the muses lead you to, that's what you are going to do. But if you want to have a certain structure, of course, you have to choose your form. So now the next thing you do is, in fact, there are three things. You have to, of course, choose your rhythms, and then you put it down. So you can get some manuscripts, or you can open down if it's finale, or if it is Sibelius you are using, or Dorico you are using, you can actually open a file, and then whatever selected rhythms you have there, you notate them down. And then you can also get your melodic line. So you can write down your motif and then get your primary theme, your secondary theme. Or unless maybe you are using a folk tune, that's also different. You can also get them down. And also any harmony. Don't forget, I said that we are looking at simple harmony. You're not supposed to put down so much harmonic progression if you want to do this, because that is what I identify in African music, our traditional African music. If you are going to score it, you are going to harmonize it, you are not going to end up using so much chord structure. I'm not saying it's wrong to do it, but I mean, we want to create that essence of repetition, but at the same time, making it beautiful. Yes. So when you select your rhythms, of course, you can just distribute the rhythms between pitched and unpitched instruments. So for example, if you are writing for the orchestra, and then for those who want to add percussive instruments, you can distribute the rhythms among them. Usually it's staying true to the culture. If you are going to bring your local instruments, that means that whatever rhythms you've chosen, it must be meant for the instrument you are going to use it for. So that at least you respect whatever culture you are borrowing from. It's only when you're writing for the page instrument, like violin, flute, the xylophone, or let me say the jill, and then the kora and stuff, that one you can just borrow from any other instrument and then apply them there. Now, let's go back to the melody after choosing the melody. One also important aspect is, aside the modal scales, you can actually also use pentatonic scales. Africa too is known to be rich in the use of pentatonic scale. so much. There are so many cultures in Africa that actually dwell on the pentatonic scale. So yeah. So basically, when you are done, that is if you also choose your folk tunes. Now, your folk tunes become like your theme. Of course, you're supposed to break it down. That's why I call it fragmentation. Yes, I use it to create shorter variations of that melody, so that just let me use Beethoven's Symphony Number 5 again. You have ta 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 tam, ta 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 tam. Now he can actually, fragment it and then use it on different parts of the composition. So that's what we have over there. And with that, you can also apply your droning for the accompanying instruments. Yes. Now, let's not forget the harmony as well. If you go to the harmony, you are saying select any of the modes to use and then use simple chord progressions, use minimal chord changes. And then after that, you can use layering to create counterpoints just to give it a rich texture. Yes. Now, if you go back to the rhythms, like I was saying, when you finish distributing the rhythms among the page and on-page instruments, you have to notate the rhythms and then use the rhythms that you've gotten for the on-page instruments. And then also you can also distribute some to the paged instruments. Yeah. And also there's one important aspect of African music too, our call and response. It's in most of our music. There's always call and there's always a response. Yeah, so you can also do that part of it. And then when you're done, you have your full African-centered composition or a composition that has an African identity. So actually, this is my thinking process. I don't know if it sounds complicated, uh, but this is what has helped me. This is what has helped me. Yes. Yeah, so these are my references. And then, yeah, thank you. I'm open to questions. I'm open to questions and any suggestions, any criticisms. I'm open to all of them. Yeah, so thank you.
I think people were more than welcome to type our questions in the chat. And then, yeah. Or you can raise your hand. Okay. I think someone has their hands raised. Well, I think yeah, Alaba, what's your question?
All right. Thank you, Kwaku, for your wonderful presentation. Um, I didn't get to do this with Genevieve because I didn't stay up until the Q&A, but my goal is to ask um, all the presenters the same question, which is, how do you define African art music? How do you theorize the idea of African art music? But also thinking about all the queries, the debate. Yeah, I'm interested in that, but more so I'm interested in how you see African art music, how you define African art music, and also what is that African in African art music? That's too many questions, but yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right. So this is actually a question that has thrown the academic, sector of music into chaos. What constitutes African art music? But to me personally, I agree with there's a scholar. Sorry, I'm trying to remember his name. I'll get his name and share it with you. But he actually groups the art musician, or let me say, African arts composers into four. Okay. And then he groups their music into four as well. And he's saying that number one, if the composer or if the composition uses it uses African techniques, if it uses the instruments, if the composer himself is an African, it can be classified as African art music. Secondly, the composer is using African instruments. He himself is an African. That can be classified as African art music. The third one, the composer himself is African, but his music is based on Western ideologies. His music is also based on, he's actually using Western instruments. He's not even using any African rhythms and stuff. It can still be classified as African art music. And for the final one, it talks about where the composer is not even African, but uses African compositional techniques. He uses African folk songs. He uses the melodies, all the techniques, drum, the rhythms and everything. That can, whatever composition he has written like that can be termed as African art music. So for me, I agree with him, because if you say you're going to find one particular definition for African art music, there's going to be a lot of arguments. People are going to disagree, even with what I stated that this composer talked about. Even for that one, people still argue about it. Yes. So in my point of view, I think I agree with him. Yes. So just for the fact that, just to summarize what I just said. So the composer may not be African, but he's using African techniques in his composition. So whatever music he has made can be termed as African art music. Okay. The composer might be African, but he's using Western composition, Western compositional techniques and everything. His music can be termed as African art music. And also we have the composer who is African and is using all the techniques that can be termed as African art music. I don't know if I've answered your first question.
Yeah, so I'm aware of the debate. I'm more interested in how you conceive, or how what you think African art music. I'm more interested in your own perspective, and I think a lot of
My
people
own perspective.
will benefit from that. I think most people are aware of it. But also, I do have to say this, because we have a lot of us here, 35 people.
Yeah.
Language is very powerful. And personally, this is just personal preference. I don't like to say Western instrument. I like to say orchestral instrument,
Oh,
because
okay.
when you trace the history of those instruments, none of them come from the West. So when we use that language, Western instrument, we're reinforcing certain hegemonies. Yeah, but
Yeah.
I'm more interested in your own perspective. Thanks.
Okay. Okay. So I'll say for me, anytime your music identifies with African African identity, with an African identity, that is what will be termed as African art music. Generally, you know what art music is, where we talk about the fact that art music is usually, number one, it's usually performed in formal settings. Art music is usually transferred, or should I say, it's kept as it's recorded through writing down, so that generations can, generations can get access to it and all that. We all know the definition for art music. So if you pick that and then you add the African identity to it, the African techniques, you get African art music. I think that leads me to your second question. What will you term as African? And that was a difficult question, because today in our era, it feels hard to define it, but we feel and we see it when something is African. Because just as we know, culture is learned, culture is assimilated and all that. We have cultures from various places mixing up with us as Africans, and everything has a mix up, to the extent that you realize that there are certain things that we are learning from each other. Some of the authenticity is gone. But if I'm to say what will I term as African, I'll say anything that leads me to my ancestry, my language, my dress. For example, what I'm wearing, we call it a smock, or some others call it fugu, and this linked to my ancestry. Aside that, the food we eat, the music we listen to, which at times can be arguable because you feel, that's what I'm saying, you can't even define it. You even feel it. You know that when the music is going on, this sounds African. I don't know if you get me. Yeah. I don't know if I'm
No,
still
no.
going around the bush.
You have. We need to move on to other
Yeah,
questions. Thank you.
I want to go
Yeah.
to Lydia's question, then we can go to the chat. So, yeah, Lydia, you could unmute to ask your question.
Mhm.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I do have a question. I'm coming from a quote unquote not scholarly point of the music practice. I'm a Kenyan singer, and the past 20 years I've been able to tour around the world, and I was indoctrinated into this terminology that we call world music. And today, for the first time, I am hearing African art music. Why can't we give our music that distinctive definition so that it is something that is identifiable, unique in its presentation, even what we do, compared to when we generalize using contemporary musical instruments to the traditional ones? And how can we, take the baton to the next generation, saying that we are distinguished in this way in terms of giving a proper name? I hope I'm making sense.
Yeah, it's actually making sense. I think all this boils down to our academic community, because there are several people have written several documents and then articles where they try to give specific names. But I think the problem here is consensus. It's consensus because, for instance, even this framework I've called Afrocentric Classical Music Framework. If I'm to say that anyone who uses this framework, if maybe someone writes a composition uses this framework, that piece should be called Afrocentric music or Afrocentric classical music. There will still be some arguments and all that. So I think it all boils down to our academic community, because usually if something is going to be named, if some research is supposed to be done, and then certain things are going to be given names, it usually comes from there. Yeah, so if there's no consensus, I think it will be hard to, that this is what we term as African classical music, or this is what determines that, okay, this is supposed to be an African. So you're not going to call it African classical music. You're going to call it something. I don't know if you get me. Yes. So I think it all boils down to the academic community.
Okay, just before I leave the platform to another person, I see that other genres are quite identifiable. If we call it pop music, we call it pop. If it's rock, it's rock, and it's if it's blues, and they all have their roots, and it can be traced. But when we call African music world music, there's a confusion because it should be the other way around. It's a mixture of other cultures and other communities from across the globe. So I don't know if there's something that can be done to give us a unique identity. Thank you.
Yeah. Like I said, something can be done about it if we can all come to a consensus, even without even going outside, where we have pop, we have hip hop, and then others. Even in Africa here, we've all agreed to what high life is. We've all agreed to what Afrobeat is. Now the problem is now for we in the arts industry. That's what I'm saying, that it all boils down to consensus. There has been always this argument amongst scholars, and I think if they come to a consensus, we can have stuff being named. Yeah. Yes.
Daniel, can I jump in quickly?
Very
Just 1 minute, just 1 minute. I know we're spending time talking about the context, but there are people who really want to dive into the music. So Lydia, to quickly just talk about what you're saying. So it's not just African music that is being termed world music. So pretty much any non quote unquote Western music is put under this big umbrella of world music. And then the Grammys reflect that, right? So there used to be the World Music Award, and then they changed the name, they changed it to Global Music. What is world? What is global? It's all again, you get the idea. So again, it comes back to who tells your story. It comes back to who is writing about us, right? So this idea of African art music, and Àkójọpọ uses Pan-African art music. If we try to define it, it's very muddy. There's a lot of debate about it, but the very act of using African art music to describe this music we're talking about is in itself political, but also it's an act of reclamation. We're reclaiming this idea of a classical African music as an original African musical tradition. Even though others might perceive allusions to the West or Western music, but we are reclaiming this musical tradition for ourselves. But Daniel, you should pick questions that directly talk about the music, and I think that will be more beneficial for the rest of the 40 minutes that we have. But yeah, Lydia, wonderful observation. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, all right. I think we have another question in the chat by Eric, asking can I employ various extended techniques to mimic certain African instruments or even certain rhythms in my composition?
Okay, so let me read the question again. Can I employ various extended techniques to mimic certain African instruments or even certain rhythm? Yes, of course you can. I mean, it's open. That's why I said that there are times where you can even fuse rhythms from different cultures. It's open to you. In fact, I tried something. I tried to see if this framework works with only African music, and I realized that not necessarily. It even works for other cultures. I tried something like that with a Hungarian culture. I picked one of their dances and it still worked. So even you as a person, if you look at your background, I think that you can pick extended techniques from there. You can even add your own techniques because even for the traditional ensembles, what they do is when they are performing, they usually add their own rhythms in there and stuff. So it's open to you. Yeah. There's no particular set rhythm. Just that if that's why I made a point that if you are going to add your traditional instruments, like the percussive instruments, for example, the cowbell, and there's a particular dance from, let's say, Senegal that you are choosing, I think if you are going to do it, that you have to be true to what the cowbell plays. Else, to me, it sounds like you're dishonoring that culture. But if you are going to, pick your own rhythms, and I think it's fair enough. There's nothing wrong with it. Yeah.
Maureen's question. When you talk about African music style being minimalistic, does this influence your creative direction, or is minimalism a result of applying the techniques you share today?
Okay, so it also stems from the fact that I noticed that generally African music is minimalistic. So that helped me, to build that identity, yeah, or to accept that identity. Because if I want to create African music as it is, then one of the ways to go is minimalism. Yes. So it's not just because it's going to be a creative direction. It's just something that should help me to be able to write music that identifies as African. Yeah. I don't know if the question is answered.
It'll be up to the person to say, but we can move on, and then if they have any clarifications, they can ask.
Yeah, it is. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Great. And then Ayomide was asking, but I'll let you read that. That's a long. I won't read all that.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for such an interesting and this. Okay. The sessions just like others. So that I had some. Okay, so let me just read the whole thing. This sessions just like others really make so much sense, and it's aligning my African composition journey because I researched some of our music heritage that was lost to slavery. And after that, I had some compositions written based off some characters. It's amazing how you mentioned a couple of these characters. And if you would be interested to give a listen, it will really help widen and impact my present and forthcoming compositions. Possibly help me partake in the Àkójọpọ composition. Oh, okay. I think he's I'm not sure if it's a he or she. Yeah. So what I'll do is I'll just give you my email. You can send me the compositions. I'll go through and then whatever I have, whatever advice I'll be willing to give it out. So let me just put my email in the chat. Okay.
And I think while you're doing that, Nancy,
yeah,
next.
So done.
Hello.
Yeah, hello.
I hope you can hear me.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that presentation. I'm from Kenya. I'm a lecturer at one of the universities in Kenya and also a composer of music.
Mhm.
There are two things I wanted to just find out from you. Number one, you talked about the drone as a repetition of one of the notes. And I wanted to find out from you in terms of definition, if I am having two alternative notes, for example, do and so, being repeated for quite a maybe 16 bars, can I still call that a drone? That is my first question.
Okay. Would you like to ask the two or should I answer that one first?
Okay, just go ahead and answer. There's no problem.
Okay. All right. So that will rather okay, before I continue, do they have the same rhythm?
Yes, throughout. The rhythm is the same and the pitches are being repeated.
Yeah, that would be more like an ostinato because now you have two notes in there and then they are just repeating in succession. So that would be more like an ostinato. Yeah, a melodic ostinato actually. Yeah.
Melodic ostinato. Okay, fine.
Yeah.
And then you talked about how to get rid of composer's block, but I did not quite get exactly what you got into explaining. How do you get rid of it? Because that is something that is common to most of us. You start writing music, you can't continue. So how do I get out of that?
Okay, so I was talking about the fact that when you pick modal jazz, okay, the foundations of modal jazz, you get simple chords, you get simple harmony. Just build melodies over it because once you're using modal jazz, now you're not thinking of the music in terms of chords, you're now thinking of the music in terms of moods. And that allows you to be able to, write several melodies because usually the composer's block comes as a result. You don't have any new melodies in mind.
Yes.
Okay. And
yes.
Usually you also don't have because you don't have the melodies, the harmony is not even going to come for you. But now you have a simple harmony. Feel free. And in modal jazz, it's such that when you have a chord, whatever you play is correct. Of course, to a certain extent. Yes, because when you now start doing certain things, you end up entering into a tonal music session. That's a whole ball game altogether. But just as I said, with modal jazz, you realize that the musicians, if it's a piano player, a trombonist, a trumpeter, you have one chord going behind, and then they are just building on top of it, just improvising. And they can do that for a very long time, for even an hour. That's why I made an example of So What. Maybe if you have the chance, you can listen to So What by Miles Davis. And that's one of the pieces that actually projected modal jazz. So with that, I think it can help us as composers to get rid of the composer's block. Because at that point, all you have to worry about is your melody, not so much as the harmony. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm
You're
grateful.
welcome. You're welcome.
Great. Looks like we have one more question. Someone was asking about they want to mimic the exact drum on the cello by slapping it. How do they determine and notate the pitch on a score?
Okay, so by slapping it, I don't know if it's with the bow or with your hands. If it's with the bow, usually the instruction is collegno, Collegno. But with the hands, I've not really observed. But to be on the safer side, just write it explicitly, like just write it as it is. Slap with the hand so that the musician knows what to do. I was studying Gabriel Abedi's music, and then he wanted to let the flute sound as if it's screaming, to have like to sound like frrr. So he actually wrote frull, Frull, so that the flute will imitate that sound. So usually there are certain things that you might not find the technical word for it. Just write it explicitly. To me, you're at liberty to do that. Yes.
Great. If people have more questions, we do have some time. But I also want to say too, please, before you go, the three things I would like you to do is: one, please fill out the feedback form. Two, if you're on this link and you have not been following Àkójọpọ, please, today will be your last day. Not like last day, but like the last day you are not following us. So please go follow us on social media. We have Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, LinkedIn. That's another easy way you can support the work that we do. And then lastly, if you're a composer on this call, we have our call for submission, which the deadline is November. We've already gotten a couple submissions. Please don't wait last minute. If you have something you are interested in submitting, please submit it in advance. But if nobody has any more questions.
I have a question since there are none. All right. So I so much appreciate your presentation today, Kwaku, on so many levels. In terms of the musical resource that you're presenting and that you are, I believe, arguing would make a composition, quote unquote, more African. Like the modal jazz and also the idea of minimalism. If we really want to talk about modal jazz, we can actually take out the word jazz. So there is no allusion to America because the idea of modal harmonies is very much in itself African, right?
Yeah.
So I'm usually very careful with language, so you'd notice that I would rather call it modal harmonies because it's very, very African. Now it's being used in jazz, absolutely. But the idea of modal harmony is not strange or foreign to us Africans. You'll find that in most traditional African musical cultures.
Yeah.
And then on the second end, the idea of minimalism, I would actually like to hear your thought on this. There are folks, I think Kofi Agawa, I'm not going to speak for him. There are folks who believe that Steve Reich's music is African. I mean, he did study in Ghana. So the idea of minimalism, the way it's being embraced in America now, and being pushed, to the fore by the likes of Philip Glass and Steve Reich. These are folks who studied, Ewe musical culture or, African musical culture and, took appreciate these ideas. Some might say appropriate them. But do you think Philip Glass's music is African since he's a
Okay.
minimalist composer?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't have much on the history of Philip Glass, but for Steve Reich, I do know he studied. In fact, he actually came to learn more about minimalism from Africa here. There are actually articles to support that, even from his own life, from his interviews, he speaks about it. That he actually came to Ghana and then he learned more about minimalism from here. So for Steve Reich, I can actually confidently say that his music is usually, I don't want to just generalize it, but I would say his music is usually African. Usually I want to stay away from topics, of appropriation because I understand a lot of these things have its basis from Africa here, but I want to make sure I have stuff to back me. When I don't, I shy away from such topics. But for Steve Reich, I can confidently argue. For Philip Glass, I can't really tell. And I know some other minimalist composers whose music actually sounds very African. In fact, I can also say it's African. If you pick someone like John Adams, his symphony, it has a lot of African rhythms in there. You understand that? But then again, I can't say for sure if he came to Africa to study over here. Because even Beethoven has a piece of music, Overture to Egmont, where he has a line from the popular high life Yamponsa. I don't know, some of you might have heard the Yamponsa line. Da, 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 dum. And he has a line that is similar, where it sings do to la di re lo so ti do to la. Somebody will argue that, okay, Beethoven's music is African music, but that is not really the case because Beethoven lived a world apart. So that's what I'm saying, that I saw these things. If I'm not sure about it, I shy away from them. Unless I confidently know that you came to Africa to study, I can say your music is African. Yes. So Steve Reich's music is African, basically. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
Chukwu Ebuka has a question.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Thank you, Kwaku, for the presentation. It's been a very interesting one this evening.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, but I would want to ask a question around contextualizing the term African art music, right? So yeah, African art music draws from African resources. But then I just want to know, what would be your thought on it? Comparing African art music and African diaspora music, do you think, is there any distinction, or would you lump them all together as African art music?
With the conditions that I gave earlier, that's why I was saying that the person might not be African. Okay, it could be a Black American, but if he's using all the techniques, if he's using all the rhythms, borrowing the instruments and all that, the music he's making can be termed as African. You understand that? Although his background is not from Africa, but the music he's making can be termed as African art music. I don't know if that answers your question.
Okay, take for instance jazz, right? It's a product of African diaspora music, right?
Yeah.
Would you lump it in as an African art music?
I don't want to make a bold statement. What I'd rather say is, I know for sure its roots are from Africa. Let me put it that way. The fear of saying something that will implicate myself, but I know its roots is from Africa. I don't know if you
All
get
right.
me.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
so
I understand.
let me use a quick example, something where everyone can relate to. We all know Fela Kuti actually came to Ghana. He listened to High Life and then actually brought out the genre Afrobeats. He's the originator of Afrobeats, or the pioneer of Afrobeats. I wouldn't say Afrobeats is Ghanaian because it had this influence from High Life. I don't know if you get me.
Yeah, you have a point there.
Yeah, So the fact that something has roots from another place doesn't mean it's basically because of course there will be other influences. Because today now jazz has moved from the use of I know when in New Orleans when it began, we had the djembe in there, we had traditional instruments being used, but now jazz has moved so far away to the extent that now jazz can be reduced to just a piano playing. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks for that. Thanks for sharing your thoughts on that. It's still something I'm still trying to wrap my head around. Right. So that's just wanted to get your thoughts around it. Thank you. Yeah. So also commenting on those the issue that was raised around Philip Glass works, whether it is African, if it can be lumped into African art music or not. Well, for the much I know, Philip Glass did most of his studies in Asia, right? Studying more of Asiatic music. Now, world music generally, and also some part of Asian music actually has that tendency of minimalism, right? And if we could just go into that way, it doesn't really give us a go ahead to just lump it in straight away as an African art music, because minimalism is not something that is specific only to African art music, right? But then I believe that if maybe in the work of Philip Glass we had seen something more distinct, like there's some more features that are more distinct to African resources that are from African music, right? Say call and response, more of maybe call and response, something that's very primarily unique. I'm not saying it's entirely unique, but that when it comes to call and response, it's something that is very more or less just about every every part of West Africa. Let me not generalize it as much, right? Has that feature. So I'm thinking maybe if we can, if he had given us something that had more features that are more unique, right? Because I've also seen, right? I did a composition, can't still remember, where I utilized some polyrhythms from that were informed. Yes, it was informed, right, by Philip Glass works. That when he was using 2 against 3, right, in polyrhythms. Right. But then I wanted to situate it, bring it home to Africa. Right. So what did I do with it? I very much added other things inside it, right? Like moving, because Philip Glass will normally just maybe there is the vague sense of melody, so to say, right? Because it's just repeating the same movement. But then I give it a distinctive melody, right? And then stick everything into the pentatonic scale. Added more of call and response, because Philip Glass will just maintain the same thing true and true, but then in between there were breaks for call and response, right? In between it. And then also I utilized that particular arrangement more as an accompaniment, so to say, right? In the entire music. So I feel, in as much as, because I know I also got some comments as to is copying Philip Glass now African music, right? But that was not necessarily in my defense, it wasn't necessarily copying really. I mean, arts draw from each other, yes, right? But then if you really want to bring it home, you definitely have to put in more of the characters that is from Africa into it to be actually able to, because polyrhythm generally is also something that is there with African music. So we can't really say I just the composer, which is me now, just lifted Philip Glass, because it wasn't a lifting, mindless lifting, so to say. Right. So it was just trying to pick elements that it brings some elements that have similarities with African music, and then putting more of African identity into the general music itself. Right. So this is just my little contribution as regards that. Thank you.
I think Alaba, yes.
No, it's not a question. I'm glad we're having this conversation. And there's something I need to speak on. So you guys, I mean, you already have an idea how Àkójọpọ is thinking about African art music. our first concert in Lagos in 2022, I believe, or 2022, we called for quote unquote Nigerian art music composition. Um, some of those compositions, if you remove the composer from it, there was nothing else Nigerian or African about those compositions.
Mm,
In 2023, and most of those composers are here. Chukwuebuka, we just spoke, Dr. Viana, who is also here. We created a call and reach out to people across the globe, Africans and mostly non-Africans as well, because the assumption has always been that you have to be African to write African art music. I do not have to be German to write a fugue. But whereas if I write a fugue, you'll recognize it as a fugue, right? Because there are rules and all that. It might be impossible to create, general rules for African art music, but we decided to follow the Akin Yuba's model, which is that, if the piece or the composition uses, African musical resource, whether stylistic or the structure or sonic element, whatever, right? And the composer is able to situate and argue, maybe not argue, but like situate and explain the resource they are using, the choices they are making, and how they are making those choices. Because being African is not the same. It's not homogeneous, right? We all have different lived experiences. So how you would explore all of that in your composition will be different from one person to another. So we came to this realization, or we decided to follow this Akinyuba's model of composing, but using musical resource from Africa to situate your work as African art music. And that's why I appreciate your presentation today so much. And presenting the idea of modal, harmony, and minimalism. I am less concerned if Philip Glass or Steve Reich music is African or not. But we need to understand some of the materials that might be peculiar, or musical materials that are inherently African. And those are the kinds of compositions we're looking for, right? And I just need to put that out. So we care less about who is doing the composition, but care more about how the composition is written, what is used. That there's some sort of, you can explain your compositional framework. I would encourage you guys to go on YouTube and listen to most of the compositions we commissioned in 2023, particularly Chukwuebuka's piece, and also Dr. Viana's piece, who is here with us. His composition, if you take out the fact that he's Brazilian, and you listen to that piece, there's so much Africanness in that piece going on. And of course, Brazil has a lot of connection to Yoruba culture. There's that connection to Africa, definitely. But listen to those compositions and you would appreciate this idea of writing compositions based on African musical resource. And honestly, whether that is the way forward for African art music, whether or not, I think it's been very productive to think more on the what and how instead of who is writing. That's my final submission. So if you're submitting a composition to us, our interest um, is that especially compositions that you're submitting for us to perform, the publication side is different, but for performance sake, we're interested in pieces that are African, and whatever that means to you, not just the person being African, really, but more so the musical resource that you're using being African, and you being able to situate and explain the compositional processes, and that is what we're looking for. So I'm saying that to now segue to say that we have a concert, hopefully, coming up in Cape Town 2026. some of the compositions you'll be submitting for publication, we might take from some of them and perform them in Cape Town in 2026.
Oh, nice.
Fingers crossed. But yeah, thank you. And I'll shut up for the rest of the day.
Hey. Wahala. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us.
Yeah.
I do want to emphasize again, I'll put it in the chat, our feedback form, our call for submission, and our follow us on social media. I believe next week we have Dr. Thomas Susan, who's going to be presenting about composition influences and focusing specifically on Ugandan works. I would definitely recommend attending that session. Attend all the sessions, but Dr. Thomas Susan is someone who has been in the game for a very long time.
Oh, nice.
Scholar.
Okay.
All right. Well, I am going to hang on because I have another meeting right after this. But everyone else, I hope you have, whether it's the morning for you, the nights, have a good day. Have a wonderful day. And I'll follow up via email. I'm Kwaku, so just, yeah, you see an email soon. Thank you all so much and have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, have a great one. Please have a wonderful day, everyone. Oh, everyone, if you're still on the link, if you could